Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we are going to share true Skinwalker horror stories. First story. The government hunts down mythical creatures and uses them against enemies of the state. I am a retired Army Special Forces operator who has 20 years of experience under my belt. 10 of those years were spent with the Scout Rangers, conducting jungle reconnaissance, covert operations, raids, hostage rescue, and all the other special operations tasks you would expect from elite military formations like SR. Meanwhile, the other 10 years was dedicated to hunting down mythical and paranormal creatures and employing said creatures against internal and external threats to the nation. I can bore you with stories of my first 10 years in the Rangers, but I doubt that it would be anything new from the stories you've already heard Special Forces operators do. Go behind enemy lines, stay undercover for weeks on end, raid enemy camps. Those are all the usual stories that have been told by others before me. So instead of telling my experiences there, I'll instead go straight to the one I'm sure has piqued your interest, my 10 years working with mythical and paranormal creatures. The idea of using mythical and paranormal creatures may seem strange at first. However, it has been a practice that has been in armed forces doctrine for nearly 7 decades now, and I doubt it that they have plans of removing it anytime soon. It is an effective method of clearing an area of enemies, and although mistakes can result in catastrophic problems, such occurrences are few. Now, I'm not saying mistakes rarely happen, because a good number of them happened in the past. However, their numbers are small enough that not many people take note of them. Besides, since operations often happen in isolated areas in hostile insurgent territory, any unexpected casualties from nearby innocent civilians can easily be blamed on the local insurgency. Now, I can go on into more detail about the cover-up campaigns and screening operations made by the government to hide their use of mythical and paranormal creatures, but that task is assigned to another special operation group of the armed forces. I'm not exactly sure of what their operations are and how their operations group is run, but I do know that they are effective in their job. Anyways, getting back on track, my Special Operations Group is known as the Mythical and Paranormal Warfare Operations Group, MPWOG, although we just refer to it as MPOG since it's less of a mouthful. You're probably thinking I'm crazy right now for saying this, and I can't blame you. If I heard of such a thing all those years ago, I would have laughed too if I had heard of such a group. It sounds outrageous and silly. True, the armed forces use psychological warfare to trick insurgents that creatures like a Swangs were out to get them, but those were nothing more than just props and sounds, not actual mythical creatures. However, if it weren't for the fact that I encountered MPOG during one of those few accidents I was talking about, then I would have never thought that the government really used creatures of pure evil to fight its enemies. It happened sometime around 1988. Back then, my Scout Ranger Company was deployed at southern Luzon to assist Regional Unified Command for an operations against the communist insurgents in the area. Patrolling the various jungle-covered mountains in the region, we would spend weeks out in the field trying to locate any trails that led to the insurgents' camps. Because of the dense jungle in the area, it wasn't too hard for the enemy to conceal their camps from aerial observation. Unable to locate insurgent bases from the air, it was up to us Rangers to hunt them down. However, on one of our nightly hunts, we encountered something that would change the rest of my career. Trekking through the mountainous jungle, trying to keep as silent as possible, my squad went through an unmarked path, hoping to find any evidence of insurgent activity. The plan was to find as many tracks as possible until they led us to their main camp. This was easier said than done, but we like to pride ourselves at being good at these kinds of jobs. All around us were a dense concentration of trees and slippery, muddy ground, while just a few meters away, On both our flanks were various mountain caves that ominously stared at us. From my position near the head of our column, I did my best to constantly glance towards the caves, being mindful to note any sign of movement. Such places were perfect hiding spots, and there was no way of telling if an insurgent was hiding inside, ready to come out and fire a long burst of automatic rifle fire. Despite being special forces, night vision goggles were pretty rare back then, especially for us field units. Because of this, we had to rely on our eyes, the moonlight, and our refined instincts in order to feel what was in our surroundings. A few hours into our patrol, my pointman, a PFC Gomez, reported seeing smoke a few meters ahead of us. Immediately ordering a halt, I told my squad to take a defensive position and keep their eyes open for a potential ambush. After that, I quietly made my way forward until I reached Gomez, who was crouching down by some underbush. "What's up ahead?" I asked in a whisper as I crouched down next to him. He pointed towards a tree up ahead of us. "You see that big tree over there?" Well, when the wind blew and caused the leaves of the trees ahead of us to begin to sway, I managed to get a quick and clear view of its top, and I noticed there was smoke coming from it. From on top of the tree, I asked, squinting my eyes to stare at where he was pointing at. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure, just wait for the wind." So I did. Soon enough, a strong breeze came along, making the many branches of the trees around us sway, opening up the curtain of leaves that had earlier blocked my line of sight. Through that small opening, I just managed to see the top of the big tree Gomez was pointing at, and right on top of it was a trail of smoke. Reflecting from the moonlight, a trail of thin, white smoke emitted from inside a wall of large leaves atop the tree, as if it were a chimney. I found this odd, and I remember thinking how strange it was for someone to make camp on top of a tree. But I quickly shrugged off my doubts, as I realized that it could be an insurgent lookout who was using the tree as a safe outpost to guard their perimeter. I had never encountered such a situation before, but it made sense to me at the time. A large tree provided a safe, concealed place from where a sentry could stay for the night and observe the ground below him. With that in mind, I convinced myself that it was indeed probably an insurgent there, who had stupidly lit a fire on top his tree or had carelessly decided to smoke a cigarette. Whichever of the two, it gave away his position. The presence of an outpost like that could have been a sign that we were close to their camp. Emboldened by this, I decided to push my squad forward to further investigate the area and gather more intelligence. Following behind Gomez, I kept my eyes on the tree, looking for any sign of movement. The rest of the squad followed behind us, all alert and ready to engage in case something bad happened. Then, all of a sudden, I heard the sound of rustling leaves and bending branches. Quickly reacting to this, I aimed my rifle forward and pointed it towards the big tree ahead of us. By then, we were only 10 meters away from the tree, and I was afraid that the insurgent noticed our approach and hurriedly got down to make an escape. However, when I scanned the area near the tree, I saw no person nearby. Thinking that he managed to escape and run for home, I let out a curse in frustration. In my mind, I assumed that he would soon be informing his superior of our presence, and we would then have a patrol sent against us. Not wanting to risk an action with such a small force, I began planning our escape. However, before I could give out any orders, a deep and old voice spoke loudly from our right. "You are not supposed to be here," it said firmly, making me almost jump from my position. Out of instinct, I immediately pointed my weapon at the source of the sound. The rest of my squad did the same. At first, I couldn't actually see the source of the voice. However, As I searched the shadows, my eyes soon fell on something that made my spine shiver in fear. Through the dim light of the moon, I managed to see a bulky naked man, with skin so dark that he almost seemed like a shadow. Scanning his body, I couldn't help but notice how large and grotesque his arms, legs, and torso were. The muscles on them were large and seemingly deformed, giving him a shape that seemed odd and unsettling. Soon fixing my gaze upon his face, I then saw two wide white eyes staring back at me with an unnatural aura that made my heart nearly stop in fright. I don't scare easily. I was surprised at how scared I was feeling during that moment. Studying the person before me, I was unsure why he looked so strange and so frightening. I felt uneasy just to stand before him, and I had to fight the urge to step back and bolt away from him. I was confused by this and didn't know why I was so scared. Trying my best to keep my composure, I tried to push away further thought of fear as I spoke up towards the person who stumbled upon us. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my sights trained on him as I kept a stern grip on my weapon. "What are you doing here?" He responded to my question by laughing. In a very rough tone, I let out a deep laugh, as if it was mocking me for asking him such questions. Normally, I would have been angry at such a taunt, but instead I felt scared. Watching him carefully, I then saw his hand move to grab something, forcing me to act on my instincts. "Don't move! Keep your hands on your sides!" I shouted, but he simply ignored me. In my mind, I thought he was grabbing for a gun, or worse, a grenade. Reacting as fast as I can, I quickly pressed the trigger of my rifle. However, to my surprise, I found myself unable to do so. Trying to will my finger to pull the trigger, I realized that I could not do it. The simple act, one that I have done countless times, could not be done, as if some kind of invisible force was preventing me. I found my finger frozen and stopped. Then I noticed that my squad was not reacting to the strange man's movements. I knew them, each one of the rangers in my squad, and I knew that they too would have instantly pulled the triggers of the rifles and shot the man. Yet not a single shot was fired. Finding my body frozen and my heart pumping fast in fear, I was surprised to find that I was still able to turn my head. Looking left and right, I saw each member of my squad seemingly frozen, as we were all stuck in a pose of pointing our guns at the man, but unable to do anything else but turn our heads. Studying the expressions on the rangers closest to me, I can see the fear plastered on their faces, the same fear that I knew was on mine. Trying to mask the fear with anger, I can hear a chorus of curses coming out of their mouths as they tried to comprehend what was happening. I too would have let out a curse, but the remaining calm part of my mind told me that it wouldn't have done anything to change the situation. So instead of shouting, I remained silent and returned my focus to the strange man. Checking what the man had grabbed, I was surprised and confused to see that he had picked up a thick lit cigarette, whose smoke and stench freely floated in the air. Placing the cigarette in his mouth, he then looked at each one of us and gave an unsettling large smile, which revealed teeth that were as white as his eyes. "I'm not supposed to let anyone pass through this trail," it told us in its deep voice. Then it began to move closer towards us. "None of you should be here." Still unable to move, we were left helpless. One of my rangers, a PFC Dominguez, found himself being approached directly by the strange man. Watching the man as he approached Dominguez, I can see him smile at the ranger and blow a thick cloud of smoke towards his face, making the ranger cough. After coughing out the smoke he inhaled, Dominguez turned his head to give the man a long look before turning his head towards me. "Sergeant, I think," he began, his voice shaky as both me and the strange man stared at him. I think he's a copper. A copper, a creature known to lurk in the jungles and mess around with those who travel through them. We had all heard the stories as kids, and as I stared at the man before us, then I still found it hard to believe that the man before was a copper. That small part of my brain tried to rationalize what was actually happening, as I thought that coppers were nothing but mythical creatures. They couldn't possibly exist. I fought the urge to believe what Dominguez had said, and instead thought that what really was before us was an insurgent. Somehow, this insurgent had administered some sort of airborne chemical agent that had paralyzed our bodies and prevented us from moving. That was what I tried to convince myself. I would have held on to that belief if it were not for the events that happened next. Staring sharply at Dominguez with his large eyes, I saw the man's expression change from amused to hurt, then to angered. Feeling my blood chill, I felt my fear rise up as he moved his face closer towards Dominguez until his eyes were staring directly at him. "Don't you ever dare call me a copper," its deep voice shouted, the noise seemingly echoing all around us. "You will pay for what you said." Then he moved his head to stare at each one of us, scanning our faces and glancing at our eyes. "You will all pay for being here tonight. None of you are supposed to be here." Trying to comprehend what he meant, I suddenly felt my thoughts interrupted when my hands suddenly began to move against my will. Unable to stop them, I let out a curse as I felt my hands loosen its grip on my rifle, before having one hand move towards the holster of my sidearm. My eyes went wide when I felt my hand grip my pistol and pull it out of the holster. Being willed by something else, my hands then switched off the safety of the pistol before raising the weapon up. Realizing what was happening, I tried my best to fight my own uncontrollable hand. "Don't resist it," the copper said, his voice low and seemingly everywhere. "Do it. Don't fight back. Let your desire end the pain." Using all the willpower I had, I fought and fought, trying to tell my own hand not to obey the copper's will. To my surprise, my efforts seemed to be doing something, as the smooth movement of my hands suddenly slowed as if encountering resistance. Feeling encouraged, I closed my eyes and tried to blot out the voice of the copper, but suddenly got knocked off my concentration when I heard 3 loud gunshots. My senses returned to my surroundings. My ears then caught 3 firm thuds around me, and I soon realized what that was. Corporal Villanueva, PFC Gomez, and PFC Ronaldo all carried sidearms. If they were being willed to do the same thing my own hands were trying to do to me, then it means they had lost the fight. Unable to spare a second to grieve for them, I tried to return my focus to my own battle. However, I was once more distracted by the shouts and curses from the remaining members of my squad. PFC Dominguez, PFC Hernandez, and PFC Isidro did not have sidearms, but they did carry combat knives for covert operations. The horrible image of them trying to stab themselves filled my mind as I realized that this was a much worse fate compared to being shot by your own hand against your will. Listening to their battle, I felt my heart drop as they cried out in anger and frustration. Letting out screams, they fought hard to save their lives. But it sounded like a losing battle. "Join your friends," the copper said, his words ringing in my ears. "It is time to rest now, so let it be and don't fight back. Death will be swift and peaceful." A succession of sharp stabs could then be heard, followed by gurgling sounds after each one. I knew where their knives went, and I felt heartbroken as each one of them fell to the ground, leaving me as the only one left in my squad. With my heart broken and my mind sufficiently distracted, my uncontrollable hand was able to gain some advantage, as it managed to move the barrel of my pistol closer to the temple of my head. Emotionally drained by the loss of my rangers, a small part of me felt that I should give in and let this unknown force make my hand kill myself. But I was a stubborn person, and I kept fighting. I knew that it was losing the fight, and that it was only a matter of time before the pistol got a good angle against me. But I would not just give in so easily. I want to fight till the last second, just like my rangers did. Trying my best to return my will to my hand, I concentrated as much as I could, trying to avoid any distractions. This, however, proved harder than expected, as the copper moved itself in front of me and stared. Chuckling deeply as it watched me, it stared right into my eyes. By doing this, I found it harder to fight my hand, as the copper gave some sort of invisible power to ensure that I would lose. "Your friends are waiting for you," he said. "What's the point of living without them? Join them, join them, join them." Cursing it over and over, I allowed my rage to give me strength to resist for just a bit longer. But each second brought the barrel of my pistol closer and closer to the temple of my head. I was now losing strength and sheer anger and force of what would not prevent my oncoming death. However, just before the barrel could move the last inch towards my temple, I suddenly felt the unseen control on my hand loosen, then disappear. Taken by surprise by this, I looked forward towards the copper to see him stare at something behind me, before slowly backing away. As he retreated, I felt the wonderful sensation of being able to control my body once more. Feeling suddenly weak as my will was returned, I almost collapsed onto the ground. However, I managed to maintain enough strength to keep myself up as I watched the copper move backwards before turning around to make a sprint in what looked like an attempt to escape. But before it could get away, it suddenly stopped, as if someone blocked its path. Before I could find out what had stopped it, I suddenly heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Instinctively, I turned around and suddenly saw 3 figures approaching me. At first, I mistook the dark silhouettes approaching me as more copperous. However, I soon realized that these figures were smaller. Careful study of them reassured me that they were not creatures of the unknown, but instead fellow humans. But as I studied them, I couldn't help but wonder who they were. The 3 men had black battle dress uniforms, making them easily blend with the night. Staring at them as they approached, I noticed all 3 of them had their weapons drawn and ready. However, I also noted that each one of them had a hand raised. Focusing on their raised hands, I noticed that they were all holding a large bottle with a silver-colored material inside of it. For a moment, I wondered what was inside that bottle before letting my thoughts drift and wonder who these men were. Inspecting the gear on them, I was impressed to see that they were fully kitted for combat and night operations. And aside from the fact that they lacked a helmet, they seemed to remind me of combat-ready American soldiers. With night vision goggles on their faces, ballistic vests protecting their torso, and a vest filled with rifle magazines and grenades, they looked nothing like the common field soldiers in the armed forces. Due to their look, I initially mistook them as American Special Forces who somehow stumbled upon my predicament. However, a quick greeting in Tagalog quickly threw away my assumption, as I soon realized that these men were Filipinos. "Hey, are you all right?" one of them asked as he approached me. "Yes," I managed to reply, my voice shaky. Lifting my hand, I saw that it was shaking also. The battle had taken its toll both on my mind and body. "Good," he told me, with a hint of relief in his voice. "You're one lucky person, you know that?" Moving closer to check on me, he soon pulled me aside so I could find a place to sit and rest. As he did this, I was able to look at the ground around me to see 6 bodies lying on the ground. I felt a pang in my heart as I saw them. My whole squad was dead now, and emotions swirled inside me at the thought of it. As I sat down and tried to reflect on what happened, I suddenly remembered the creature that caused all of this trouble and turned my attention towards the direction I last saw him. Still standing in the same spot, I saw the copper remained unmoving in his position as another group of black-clad soldiers emerged from the darkness, weapons drawn and ready. Although I had a hard time seeing clearly in the night, I did note that this group also had raised hands, and I knew that this meant that they too were carrying the same bottles filled with silver-colored material. As these men got closer to the copper, the creatures seemed to hiss in anger at each step they took. However, unlike his earlier arrogance and dominance, the copper looked helpless against the new arrivals. Once more my curiosity was ignited, as I wondered who these men were and what was so special about these bottles these men carried. As I sat there and watched, I took in what I could and hoped that I would at least get some answer from them later on. After a while, most of the black-clad men formed a circle around the copper, while one detached himself from the main group and walked towards me. As he got closer, he took a quick glance towards my fallen rangers before doing a sign of the cross. "I'm sorry about your friends," he told me. "I'll detail one of my squads to recover them once we secure our target." "You mean that copper?" I inquired. "Yes, but that's not a copper. Never mistake it as a copper. They hate it when you do that," he said, gesturing towards the terrible monster behind him. "What that is Agda. Similar to a copper, yes, but only native to eastern Visayas. Unlike copras, they are more hostile and can get very dangerous. But they're easy to control once you get mercury near them." "Is that what you were carrying in those bottles?" I asked. "Yes," he said, before continuing his explanation. "Mercury has this magical effect on them that weakens their power. An Agda can seduce you to do things you don't like. But if you have mercury on you, then it is unable to use its powers or strength." "Well, that's good to know," I said, making a note to always bring mercury with me in any future patrol. However, as he explained the creature to me, there was one thing that nagged my mind. Taking my chances, I decided to ask him in hopes of getting an answer. "You said that Agdas were native to eastern Visayas, right? So what is it doing here in Luzon?" "Because we brought him here," he told me plainly. "You brought him here?" I said, nearly shouting it, eyes wide in shock. I felt more confused than ever. Why would you bring a terrible creature like that here? I felt rage boil inside me at the thought of what they had done. "You're soldiers too, aren't you? You're supposed to protect the country, not spread harm within its borders," I said, although at the time I wasn't really sure if they were soldiers like me. For all I knew, they could actually be members of a private army for some kind of organization that collects these creatures. "Easy now, it's not like we had a choice," he explained. "The orders came from the AFP chief, who ordered MPOG to deploy CN 0109, since he thought the Agda would be an effective way of countering insurgent movements in the area. Well, he did do a good job for the first few nights, but apparently his habit of mischief made him forget that our deal meant that he could only target members of the insurgency. He was out of line for targeting your men, and I apologize that our operations group did not realize the danger sooner. This was our first time deploying an Agda, and maybe the last." I stared at him for a moment and took in what he said. However, out of all the things he said, there was one thing that stuck out the most that I couldn't help but continue to think about. "What's MPOG?" With that, he began telling me about the operations group and how they used mythical and paranormal creatures for various clandestine operations. He was a lieutenant, I learned, and his platoon was one of a few elite units trained at deploying and capturing creatures and entities through the use of special methods and equipment. At first, I didn't want to believe him. But then again, How could I not believe him when one of the very creatures they used had attacked me and killed my squad? At the end of his explanation, I found myself with a new view of the world. As if my eyes were now open, I now realized that there were more things that lurk in the darkness of the jungle than just insurgents. This scared me a lot, and I realized that I suddenly felt thankful for the fact that an organization like MPOG existed to make sure that such creatures and entities did not wreak havoc upon the cities, towns, and barrios of the country. Why tell me all this? I finally asked. If your operations group is supposed to be secret, why reveal so much information to an outsider like me? I looked at him, and through the faint light of the moon, I saw a grin form on his face. Because I see potential in you. I have never seen someone with a strong enough will to resist the deadly seductions of an Agda, and because of that I know MPOG would have a place for you. Recruitment season is coming up soon, and the operations group only sends invitations to those who we think will qualify. Once the offer arrives, I hope you take it. With that, he gave me a small nod before walking away. A few minutes later, the rest of the MPOG forces arrived to help secure the area and contain the Agda. Later that morning, I was returned to the army camp, which me and my squad had left the night before. The official story was that my squad was ambushed by insurgents and that I was able to hold out until reinforcements arrived to recover me and the bodies of my rangers. For this, I was awarded the Gold Cross. However, knowing the true events, I felt unworthy to receive the award. This was my first encounter with mythical creatures and MPOG, but it was definitely not the last. 2 months after the encounter, I received a letter inviting me for MPWOG qualifications. I accepted it, and thus my career in the operations group began. You're probably wondering what this letter has to do with you. Well, the lieutenant I met during the night of the Agda encounter was your father. He would eventually become my commanding officer and, in later years, a good friend. I know you are curious about who he really was and what happened to him, so I will tell you about his deeds and his ultimate faith. But I need to make sure first that you believe me. I don't want to waste time and energy writing a letter that you might just crumple up and throw away. So if you get this and believe what I am saying, then I suggest that you write back to me, and I'll tell you all about your father's time at MPOG. This letter was recently sent to me, and I need help figuring out what to do next. For a few months now, I have been collecting various notes and journals of my father in order to create a biography in his honor. My father was a scout ranger who achieved the rank of major before passing away in an operation that was deemed so secret that until today me and my family still don't know what exactly happened. As part of the biography, I had asked various colleges of my father to write letters about their experience with him. I have received dozens of letters from his old army friends, but this one stuck out the most. At first, I didn't know if I should believe him. Everything he said didn't make sense. My father was a scout ranger, not some special forces operator that worked with mythical creatures that don't exist. However, the letter came with a photo. In that photo were 2 uniformed men posing next to some kind of makeshift sandbag bunker. Both men had patches with MPWOG written on it. One of the men was my father. Second story. I went in search of a cryptid that my great-great-grandfather encountered. Whatever your thoughts on California as a state, there is no denying that it is the home to some of the most awe-inspiring landmarks, not just in the U.S., but in the world. Sequoia National Park, in particular, which is 631 square miles of beauty, is home to one of the world's oldest and largest living organisms in the world, the behemoth General Sherman redwood tree. It's mind-boggling to think that this ancient being was alive for thousands of years. It was alive during the American Revolution, during the Spanish Inquisition. It was alive during the reign of King Tut, as many of its sister redwoods were that constitute the forest lands. This lost world has seen its share of rivers moving and species evolving, and unfortunately, going extinct as well. The last known California grizzly bear sighting was in 1924 after they were thought to have been hunted to extinction by prospectors who poured into the California mountains during the gold rush. Who knows, there could still be one out there somewhere. These types of sightings happen quite frequently. The Yangtze River dolphin, thought to be extinct, had also recently reappeared. Beyond the California grizzly bear and the Cyclopean redwoods, I believe there is something else in those mountains. The radical California wildfires that have been plaguing the state for nearly 2 decades have had a monumental, possibly irreversible, toll on the various parks' ecosystems. While most fires are natural and sometimes necessary, they have been getting more pervasive and out of control. Climate change is a big factor in their cause as rising temperatures begin to dry out kindling. However, there is another cause which is much less talked about. Over the years, people have been pushing more and more into the California wilds, not only creating infrastructure which gives fuel to fires, but carelessly causing them as well. Just some of the causes of the California wildfires range from vehicular sparks, faulty power lines, and a gender reveal. As a result, animal populations have begun to flee their homes and push back into towns and cities, occasionally resulting in attacks. The craziest stories of animal attacks weren't coming from those that wandered into town, though. Soon after, there was circulations of attacks from strange, unidentified creatures that were monstrous in nature. They were described as being nearly the size of a horse and bird-like. They sounded so outlandish. These people had to have been attacked by mountain lions or bears or something. The natives of the area, however, actually had stories of these creatures dating back hundreds of years, so possibly not too far-fetched. Either way, something that was once living deep in the woods was now beginning to emerge, it seems. Then I came across something that cemented my intrigue. Not too long ago, my grandfather had passed away. I'd like to believe he went peacefully, but the poor old man had a few health issues caused by the Central Valley's poor air quality. While rummaging through his old belongings, I came across what my father told me was the old journal of my great-great-grandfather, which my grandfather had kept in an old cedar chest. Apparently, my great-great-grandfather was quite the renowned tracker and surveyor during his time. I spent a whole afternoon reading that thing, immersing myself into a time which sprang into existence right after the era of the American Old West. One of the journal entries details an expedition up into the Sequoia National Forests. July 26th of 1908. The previous few nights have been filled with such peril as I have never felt in all of my previous adventures. We have come up into the Sierra Nevadas, my colleague and I, Mr. Jim Foxhart, for a very peculiar job sanctioned to us by the state of California. The state is beginning more aggressive expansion into these foothills, which were once occupied by Monachi. They claim this expansion has caused some commotion from some peculiar wildlife, sounding mostly as monsters in their various descriptions. We rendezvoused with a Dr. Edward McMillan, a biologist from the University of Davis, who has accompanied us to catalog and identify this potentially unknown species, though I was dubious that we would come across anything of the sort. On about the 3rd night, setting camp much deeper into the redwood forest, I was only an hour or so into my night watch when I began to hear loud screeches, the likes of which were unidentifiable to me. These screeches would come and go at no predictable pattern, but they seemed to be calling to each other and getting louder. Mr. Foxhart was also awakened by this sound, and we sat there together for a good 15 to 20 minutes attempting to identify what creature it could belong to. Having no such luck, we woke Dr. McMillan, who also stated that these sounds were not of an animal in which he was familiar with. We were certain, however, that it was multiple animals, a pack of some sort, and that they were predatory. We grabbed our rifles and lanterns and headed towards the source of the nearest cries, but the cries had stopped. I heard some rustling just to our right, and upon raising my lantern, I was flabbergasted to see a large emu of some sort, but with a large horse head, sharp claws on both hands and feet, and a long feathery tail. Its eyes glistened in my light, and though I only caught a quick glimpse of it, I could see that it was a beast almost the size of a horse. The animal quickly darted off with great speed. The other two men were just as puzzled as I am. Though Dr. McMillan had said what we had just seen looked very much like a species in the Dromaeosauridae family, a species of dinosaur. We tracked them down for about a mile, but the further we pushed away from camp, the more we began to hear loud screeches, to which Foxhart agreed, sounded very much like warning cries. Evidently, we were pushing into their territory deep into the forest. We lost track of the creatures, and the calls subsided. We spent another couple of weeks in the forest, but after that night, made no further contact or found any relevant traces, and so decided that this pack must have moved deeper into the forest to avoid human conflict. I had never really been a big believer in cryptids like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster. Sure, it was amusing watching those documentaries on the Discovery Channel or those videos on YouTube, but I always felt that there were other explanations for what people encountered. This connection, however, was just too tantalizing. There was no way it could be exactly as everyone described it. Where could it have been hiding all these years? Besides, it had been a while since I had just gotten away back to nature, not that I needed such an excuse. After an exhausting few months of work and school balance, my brain was on autopilot. Once the parks opened back up, I had decided to plan a solo outing for myself. I packed up some gear, my Kodak camera, rations, my lucky knife, and headed out west to the sequoias. I drove up the winding roads, past some devastation left by the fires of the summer. Businesses and homes were burned down. Some were just being cleared. Some were being rebuilt. I was good to see that society would carry on, though I had no doubt in my mind that there were lives ruined. Would we ever learn our lesson? It was good to get out of the car after a few-hour drive and stretch once I found a good campsite. I was lucky to find a place secluded, probably because this was an area which was associated with the alleged attacks. I actually did go on evening hikes with my Kodak and a field recorder. I'm not sure what I expected, really. I guess I let my imagination get the best of me. I only wanted to spend a good week. I don't like wasting my vacation, leave willy-nilly. Then it became real. It was Thursday night when I was awakened from my sleep by a loud screeching sound. It invaded my dreams first, and then pulled me out, looking up at the moonlit tent walls. I laid there quietly for I don't know how long, trying to decipher that sound. The journal entry then came to mind. Was this what my great-great-grandfather heard? I was both excited and terrified. I had to investigate. I grabbed my Kodak flashlight and, of course, my knife, and slowly crawled out of my tent. I found that I was not as good as my great-great-grandfather had been at determining directions, as the sound sounded like it was coming from all around the forest, echoing through the old pines and off the cliffs. It soon became apparent to me that, as my grandfather had also determined, there were multiple calls responding to each other. I don't know what oddly placed bravery came over me, but I had the sudden courage to search into the dark forest for them. I quietly scanned the area for them, at first only circling my campsite. Luckily, I had a good sense of direction, so I knew I wouldn't get lost. I then got a good bearing on where the sound was emanating from, so I started strolling in that direction. I walked for a good 10 minutes when the screeches suddenly began to bark louder and more frequently. I heard a rustle just off in the distance to my left. I quickly aimed my powerful light and saw a black bear running off. It wasn't really the bears I was worried about, though, as I always had a small can of bear spray on me. But what was he running from? For whatever asinine reason, maybe I was still a bit tired, I pressed on. Now, I'm not a tracker by any means. I wasn't even in Boy Scouts, but I could have sworn I saw odd bird-like tracks in the dirt, or at least I thought I did. The hair stood on my neck as more and more the events of the journal entry and the stories suddenly became more plausible. Could it? This whole time, I guess I just thought I was going to find some loudly mating birds and then have a good chuckle and go back to bed. There was more commotion going on around me. I would frantically whip my light in the direction, but would see nothing. Maybe about an hour or so into my night stroll, I came across some odd structure. It looked like some kind of weaving of sticks and trash. I cautiously approached for a closer. Oh my God! It was a nest. There were eggs in there, odd-looking eggs. They looked the size or regular chicken eggs, actually. I stood there dumbfounded for a moment. Then it hit me. Something literally hit me. I went stumbling back as something slammed into my side with immense force. I quickly scrambled to my feet and frantically looked around. There were clicking noises now coming from all around me. Then I saw it. It jumped out of the foliage with tremendous height and began to cackle at me, bowing low. It was trying to intimidate me. Some sort of bird-like animal with a long tail diagonally pointing up and a long snout and claws at the end of its feathered arms. I instantly drew the connection between these creatures and the creatures of the stories. I had just stumbled upon something that may have existed for millions of years, evolving in its own way, in near total isolation and uncategorized by humans. Funny enough, however, I did note one notable difference. These creatures were not actually horse size, more like the size of a large dog. Some things are just exaggerated, I guess. In either case, the one staring me down sent shivers coursing through my body. I was suddenly knocked down again. I pushed myself up with all my might. There was another one. The one in front of me was just a distraction. Now, there were three all flanking me. I knew there had to be more. I also knew they were just defending their nest. I wasn't any less terrified. One to my right charged me. I got him with my bear spray just as he lunged. I got him square in the face as he began to flail. The others looked puzzled and squawked at each other. I quickly sprayed a line of spray and backed away slowly. I continued fast, walking backwards with my light on the nest until it was out of sight. I would continuously hear squawking from around me. These forest ninjas were monitoring my every move. I had my bear spray ready as I figured that would be a more effective defense than my knife. It wasn't nearly as sharp as what they were packing. Every once in a while, I would catch a glimpse of them, their eyes shining in my light, off in the distance, flanking me. If these animals really wanted to, they could have swarmed me. I think they were just being sure that I didn't pose a further threat to their nest. They weren't taking any chances, and neither should I. I began hiking towards my Jeep, bypassing my campsite, as it would have been foolish of me to try to sleep there tonight. After some time, as I approached the roadside clearing where I parked my Jeep, the squawking and rustling had faded. I hauled myself into my Jeep, exhausted from the running and the terror. I locked the doors, reclined my seat, and laid there contemplating what I just experienced, wondering if it was real or just a dream brought on by too many nights watching creepy videos. I didn't notice myself drift off to sleep. The next morning I got up late, around 11-ish, as you can imagine after having the rough night I had. I made the short hike to my campsite and found it undisturbed. I packed up my tent and the rest of my belongings and gear, but took one last look around the site. I didn't see anything that would provide indication of what happened last night. I normally don't drink coffee, but I grabbed some at the nearest 7-Eleven as I figured I'd have a long drive home. I unpacked my stuff as usual, as if nothing different had happened this time. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe it was a dream. Hell, I didn't even think to use my camera or my field recorder. Damn. As I was unpacking my backpack, however, I noticed something was caught to the back strap. It was a feather. A large feather. Third story. My Skinwalker experience. First off, I have told this story before in a public setting around 2008. I was living in Louisiana at the time and had called in a coast-to-coast AM and told this story to George Norrie, which was a pretty cool experience. I didn't have a whole lot of time to tell some of the details, so you'll be getting the unedited version, so to speak. It happened somewhere between 1997 to 1999. I was in my late teens, and we were living in New Mexico up near the Four Corners. My parents were pastors at a local church in a very small town. We had lived outside of town, sort of out in the middle of nowhere, and there were a few houses sprinkled around us. Surrounding was, at least where there were no houses, there was some brush and a lot of desert. Ever since we moved there, the locals told us about skinwalkers. Even people in the church warned us about them. One guy in the church swore up and down that when he was a truck driver, he saw a skinwalker in its human form running alongside his truck when we was going about 80 miles per hour. But since I didn't witness it, I just took him at his word. I had heard many different tales on the origins of the skinwalkers, both from the locals and the Native Americans. There was a Native American who went to our church, who still held on to his Navajo beliefs, who told me what I always assumed to be a more accurate description. He told me that when people of his tribe had a child out of incest, the tribe leaders take the baby out into the desert to be raised by wolves. The wolves would raise it, and they would become skinwalkers, having the powers to turn into anything, animals, humans, etc. The story fascinated me. He just seemed to know for sure that this was the accurate tale. Then he warned me to never whistle at night, which I thought was pretty weird, but I never did until one night. It was in the fall, around 11 o'clock at night. I was in my bedroom, which was the furthest room from anyone in the house and near the garage, watching TV or playing PlayStation. My mother was in her bedroom. My dad was at the church studying, as he always did till around midnight. My brother had a friend over that night, and they were going to spend the night on the back patio, which was a long rectangular room with screen windows all down it. Like I said, I was in my bedroom minding my business when my brother and his friend come banging on my door. Annoyed, I opened the door, and my brother, who is 4 years younger than me, and his friend are both frightened. My brother said as they were in the patio goofing off, they heard someone walking around the backyard and saw what looked to be the top of a white bald head walk by the screen windows. Now, normally I would believe my brother since he would never make this kind of stuff up, but his friend was a huge liar and had told tall tales about having been to Mars, even showing us the red dirt, which looked an awful lot like the red dirt you could find throughout the area, I might add. Of course, by this time I had experienced a lot of paranormal stuff, but I was still skeptical. Bravely and annoyed, I grabbed my jacket and a flashlight, and the three of us went out to the patio. It was always creepy at night because it was always so dark, and the only light came from a nearby lamppost a few yards down the street. Our backyard was insanely small except for the right-hand side of it, which was a bit bigger but held a trampoline which took up the better part of it. We stepped out of the patio, my flashlight shining around the yard, but saw nothing. That was when I started hearing the crunching of leaves coming from the front yard, so the three of us went through the back gate to the front yard. Now our front yard was huge and had roughly 9 apple trees. There was even a large creepy tree in the corner of the yard near the street I always stayed clear of for some reason. We had a close neighbor literally on the other side of the wooden fence. It was a nice family that had a daughter about my brother's age, and they also had a bunch of chickens, and sometimes they would wander into our yard, so that is what I thought was walking around our front yard. Shining the flashlight around, of course, I couldn't see any chickens, but I did see something white walk behind a tree near the wooden fence. That was when I got very curious. The three of us walked slowly to the tree. I was being the protective big brother and kept the other two behind me. Before I knew it, I heard a loud whoosh and felt a gust of wind like something flew by us. My brother screamed out in pain. My brother always had his shirt off, which annoyed me because back then I was overweight and very self-conscious, but I noticed on his chest he had 3 long scratches across him. Scared and shocked, my brother ran back inside the house, leaving me and his friend. It all happened so quickly, but I ran towards the street where I was sure whatever it was had gone, his friend close behind me. Once we reached the end of our property, I could hear the sound of bare feet running down the paved road. I shined my light towards the sound, but never saw anything. So I whistled some tune, and from down the road, I heard the same tune whistle back to me. Intrigued, I whistled again, this time a different tune, and again the same tune was whistled back. My brother's friend started getting scared and kept trying to get me to go back inside, but I was very intrigued. I whistled for the 3rd time, and that was when, very close by, we both heard a male voice say, "Hey kid, come here." There was no hesitation. The two of us bolted back inside. We went to go tell my mother what happened, and she was already frightened because she was tending to my brother's scratches on his chest. We told her what happened, and my mother told us to stay inside. My mother has had some pretty scary paranormal encounters before. I need to tell those stories soon as well, so she believed us. I have never forgotten that encounter. My brother brushes it off these days, making out to be not a big deal, but I know differently, as does my mother. It's one of the main incidents in my life that literally bothers me to this day. 4th story. I might have had a possible encounter with a skinwalker. I'm not that great of a storyteller, but I'll just quickly write what happened. We were staying at a Hogan Airbnb on the Navajo Nation close to Monument Valley, and there were several very friendly, calm dogs roaming around. I and my friends, one of whom is deathly afraid of dogs, had no problem being with them or petting them. We had a gorgeous view of Monument Valley right from our door, and it was cold, yet cozy. That night I needed to use the bathroom and opened the door to the dogs going absolutely nuts. There is a difference between a dog barking at just whatever, a person walking by, for example, and then there was this total fight or flight response. One of the dogs ran up to me looking anxious and glancing into the desert behind the Hogan. It came close, then walked back to look into the desert behind the Hogan. It first stood up and it suddenly looked more like a wolf and took off into the desert at full speed, growling and barking at a huge shadow that ran away from the dog. There aren't many huge animals in the area, some deer and horses, maybe cattle, but this was bigger. I didn't stick around long enough to check what it was. I was pretty shaken by what I saw. Found some fresh wolf/mountain lion prints and hoof prints, probably from a horse. Outside the Hogan the next morning, the dog's prints are smaller. Our host said we might have seen a skinwalker. I do like to believe it was a horse. It was dark anyhow, but the host didn't want to talk about it too much. The guides we met later on said the same thing, and kept it at that. Later that day, one friend suddenly fell ill on a tour of another Hogan and almost fainted. That never happened before in her life. The guide said she probably had some bad spirits attached to her. She recovered quickly after stepping outside. 5th story. Saw another Skinwalker story on here earlier. Here's my experiences with them. Growing up, I lived in northeastern Arizona, literally about 5 miles south of the Navajo Reservation in Winslow. Naturally, being that close to the reservation, or the res. Skinwalkers were a huge topic of conversation amongst the locals, and we all took it very seriously. Stories of personal experiences abounded. I was no different. Well, to start off my set of stories, I was about 9 or so. My family had gone camping in a little spot about 50 miles or so south of town called Heart Canyon, near Wiggins Crossing, if anyone is interested. We had been there all day, and I was extremely familiar with the area as we had camped there 20 or so times before. So my parents let me just wander about alone in the woods. This was back in the early 90s. Anyway, I had some G.I. Joes that I had been playing with in the nearby creek. About 80 yards from our campsite, there were not other campers there with us. My mom had called me back to camp for dinner, so I left and ate. Played around camp for a while and realized that I'd forgotten my toys back at the creek. So I took a flashlight and headed back that way. I knew right where I had left them, so in no time I found them and grabbed them up. As I was squatted down to grab them on the edge of the water, a sudden urgency that I'd never felt before ran down my spine. I remember feeling frozen because of the fear. Like the little boy on E.T. when the alien comes out of the field for the first time and he's trying to scream for his family. I looked up and pointed my flashlight to the other side of the creek and about 10 yards down the way. I saw something. At first I thought it was a deer, but it was standing up, so I thought it may be a bear. But it was too skinny and not enough poofy hair. It skunked behind a tree and peered out slightly at me. I seriously was too scared to move. I had just read a bit about Bigfoot for the first time. Since it wasn't really popular in my area, I thought for a long time that that's what I saw. I finally had seen enough to gather my wits and scram as fast as I could back to camp. I told my parents, and they kind of dismissed it as my imagination. So I just stayed close the rest of the trip. About 2 years later, I was at my house. I had 2 dogs. They were outside dogs, lived their whole lives in my backyard. One night they went psycho, barking at first at something in the alley behind my house. Then they both started whimpering. I had my window open slightly, and one of my dogs straight up jumped up to the window, frantically chewed through the screen of the window, forced its way into the house, and would not leave the house for 3 days. Another time when I was about 13, we used to play night games in the town. Mostly, there being nothing much else to do, we would walk around our neighborhood and act suspicious, so the cops would come chase us around. And we run down the alleyways and hop into random folks' backyards to hide. Now, it was extremely common to see an intoxicated Navajo or Hopi in the alley, or the street. So it was no big deal to see one in the alley behind my house that night as we being 2 of my friends and myself, ran from a police car hot on our tail. We saw him plain as day, standing in our way. We ran around him and jumped into the nearest yard to hide. We waited for the cop to pass us and hopped back out. Literally about 3 minutes went by. We ran back the way we came, and as we got to the point where the Indian had been, he was gone. Legit. In his place was a coyote sitting there watching us. We ran right past it, feet from it. And anyone who knows coyotes knows they will bail out way before you get close to them. This bugger held his ground and calmly sat and watched us run past him. We all freaked out and stayed inside for a month. My last experience was when I was about 15 or 16. My brother has a girlfriend that lived in a small community south of Winslow called Starlight Pines, about 25 miles-ish. Well, we went to go see her one day, and as we drove out, about 15 miles out, we saw an Indian guy standing on the side of the road, which was quite odd because the res was north of town, and it was rare to see anyone on foot south of town because it's just desert and forest for literally 80 miles. Anyway, we see this guy, He looked normal enough. Flannel shirt, jeans. We got to our destination and hung out with my brother's GF and her family well into the night when we decided to head back home. Hopped in his truck, a Chevy S10, and drove back the way we came. In the same spot we saw the Indian dude, he was still there. I remember thinking, that dude is crazy standing out there all day and into the night. What's he doing? Right as we passed him, we hear a loud bang on the back of the truck. At first I thought we hit an animal, but I hadn't felt anything that we'd run over. I turned around and looked out the back window. My brother started to slow down, thinking there may be something wrong with the truck. In the brake lights, I see the Indian guy chasing after us. We are easily going 55 to 60 at this point as we were about to stop. The guy is in the road, feet behind us. I scream at my brother to not stop. Gun it, man. Gun it. He does, and being a Chevy S10, it had a speed governor on it at 80. 2 miles. 2 miles. This guy keeps up with us. We are seriously freaking out. I asked my brother, what if we don't make it back to town? Or what about when we have to slow down once we get close? After those 2 miles that stretched forever, I looked back, and he was gone. We got home, booked it into the house, and told our parents. Next morning, I get up to head somewhere and look at my brother's truck thinking about the night before. I wonder what the loud bang was just before we started getting chased. Inspecting the truck, I found a handprint smeared in the dust from about 2/3 over to the right, then smeared to the right taillight. I never went there again. 6th story. I think my neighbor's cat warded off a Skinwalker. My father died about 5 years ago unexpectedly from a heart attack. To say it was hard on my mother, and I was an understatement. Our old house in Knoxville just didn't feel like home anymore. About a year later, Mom and I made plans to take ourselves and our elderly dog Ace on a move further south to a small town situated about a half hour from Atlanta. Just a few days before we were slated to move, however, I had one of the most vivid dreams I've ever come to experience. All that was within my dream was my bedroom. A picture-perfect recreation of the real thing. I sometimes wonder if I was in some sort of sleep paralysis state when it occurred. To further add to the dream's realism, in the middle of the night, the street lights right across the street would illuminate through my window, creating a light reflection on the wall perpendicular. In my dream, as I lay there staring at that exact reflection on the wall, I saw an orb of smoke fade in from the shadows. Goosebumps chilled across my skin as I lay there panicked and afraid to move a muscle. Suddenly, it stopped moving and steadily hung in the light's reflection, as if it was staring at me. Without warning, it spoke to me in my dead father's voice. I'm sending something to watch you. Despite hearing my father's voice come from the orb, I was terrified of it. I didn't know why, and yet I managed to squeak out a small reply towards it. What? I whispered. The orb remained silent for a few moments, leaving an eerily dead silence in the voice's place. Just as quickly, it spoke to me one final time. Damn. Black. I woke up almost instantaneously, gasping for breath. The nightmare had chilled me to my core. I didn't know exactly what to make of it, especially those 2 final words. I chalked it up to maybe Dad wishing us well on our move, but at the time, I couldn't shake the feeling it was some kind of warning. Within the next couple weeks, my mother and I moved out of Knoxville and headed down south to Georgia. She had managed to find a quaint little house for us. With only 1 or 2 neighbors down a gravel road in the middle of the woods, it was a nice fit for us. Probably the best reliever of all the stress that came with the move, however, was our new neighbor's cat. She was a petite, older black cat that gravitated towards me almost instantly, and I treated her as if she was my own pet. I left out a can of food once or twice a week for her, and even if I didn't call out for her when she saw me outside, she would always run up to me. She helped ease my tensions about leaving Knoxville behind, especially without Dad there with us. Less than a month into our new house, I awoke suddenly to a faint coughing noise that sounded like it was coming from downstairs. One important thing to know about our dog Ace is that he has a collapsed trachea. He needs medicine to help calm the condition down, so I'm used to waking up in the middle of the night to give him his medicine. I proceeded downstairs from my bedroom to give him his cough medicine, but I couldn't find him anywhere throughout the house. He wasn't in his bed sleeping, he wasn't in the kitchen, he was nowhere to be found. I didn't check Mom's bedroom, however, as to avoid waking her up. Besides, I wouldn't have heard the coughing if he had been in there anyway, so I just let it be. That's when I heard the cough again, but it was coming from further away, as if from outside. I looked over at the side patio door leading out into the woodlands and realized I had forgotten to shut it. There it stood, slightly ajar. Shit, I thought to myself, he got out. I immediately ran outside with a flashlight and started calling out for my dog. Ace! Ace! I shouted into the neighboring trees. I heard another cough and shined my light in its direction. That time, it had echoed from down the gravel road. I swear, a path had never looked so terrifyingly desolate before in my life than that night, as I stared down the same gravel road that had led us to our new home. But in that moment, I thought my dog was lost and I chalked it up to new house jitters, so I pressed onward. Ace, come on, boy. Home's this way, buddy. That's when I heard it, the cough that I had been following, almost right beside me. But this time, it didn't stay like the dry cough I had been hearing. Instead, the cough had slowly descended into a low growl. I shined my light towards the new sound. There stood a bright red fox in the middle of the path. For a moment, I figured it was some kind of sick fox I had mistaken for my dog. The whole time, as I was processing what I was seeing, it stared directly at me. Its eyes glowed from the light of my flashlight. However, our stare broke when it tilted its head to the right. I looked down, and there she was, our neighbor's little black cat standing beside me. However, it was as if she had completely changed persona. She was no longer the happy, affectionate cat I had come to know. Instead, she had her back arched upright, every fiber of hair standing at attention, and uttered the lowest growl I had ever heard come out of a feline. In that moment, I figured she was just scared of the fox, so I knelt down beside her in a bid to coax her away and avoid the fox hurting her. But no matter how many times I tried to coax her out of fight mode, she wouldn't budge. Her stare remained unfazed. That's when I looked towards the direction of the fox once more, but there wasn't a fox standing there anymore. Instead, in the exact same spot of that gravel road, was a walking, rotting corpse of a roadkill coyote, slowly moving towards me. I took a step back, absolutely horrified of what I was seeing. Its jaw was hanging loose from its face. One of its eyes was stained with blood, and it wobbled back and forth, as if it was desperately fighting pain. I rubbed my eyes out of disbelief, hoping I was imagining it, but it was still there when my eyes reopened. Despite the gruesome sight before us, our neighbor's black cat, no matter how tiny she was, stood there and kept growling at the creature. Suddenly it stopped. The creature had ceased its walk towards us. For a moment, it just stood there, glancing back and forth between myself and this little black cat that was trying to defend me. That's when I unmistakably heard this beast mutter two solemn words in a low, gravelly voice. Damn! Black! In a flash, the creature ran straight into the woods. I shined my flashlight in its direction, but it had completely vanished. Even the brush it had ran through looked untouched. That's when the cat, still standing beside me, calmed herself down. Almost as if nothing had happened, She rubbed herself up against my leg, returning to her normal, loving mood. Despite technically not being mine, I proceeded to scoop her up and run back into the house. Before heading upstairs with the little black cat snuggled up in my arms, I decided to poke my head into my mother's room. Laying on the floor, sound asleep, was Ace. He had been there the entire time. I quietly closed her door before bolting upstairs. I made sure that little cat slept with me in my bed that night. From the research I've done, I think I was almost a victim of some kind of skinwalker. It must have picked up the sounds my dog sometimes makes late at night, knowing I'd likely come to his aid. For whatever reason, our neighbor's black cat had scared it so badly, it scrambled away. I haven't seen it since that night. Maybe because that same cat still likes to wander down the gravel road late at night, or maybe that thing just decided I wasn't worth the trouble. Either way, whether I have my father or pure luck to thank, I leave a can of food out every single night for that little black cat. And the most ironic part of it all, that cat's name is Halloween. 7th story. So you guys like Skinwalker stories? I have a quick one for you. I posted one another thread, but it was so long, I didn't want to hijack the comment section of a good story. I'm dying, Navajo, and boy have I heard a lot of stories growing up on the reservation. While I've never seen anything myself, which I am grateful for, I have benefited by being around the people who have. There is a different kind of evil that exists in the quiet high deserts and deep sandstone canyons of Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, even Colorado and the southern Ute area. I can only describe it as an ancient evil. Now, there are helpful ceremonies, rituals, and traditions that are still practiced to this day. Hell, even a local hospital has an on-duty medicine man. But it seems to be a double-edged sword. What I mean is there is also black magic, which most time will not even acknowledge or speak of. We are very superstitious and are heavy with taboos. You will find this with most First Nation people. From Alaska to Argentina, it's just something you don't do, in fear that it will get the attention of unwanted spirits or harmful beings. Skinwalkers or Naldlushii are just a few stories that kept me up at night with the covers over my head. Here's a quick one for you guys. A Navajo tribal police officer was driving west on what used to be officially named Highway 666. It was lighty snowing, maybe a quarter-inch, which is a lot of snow for home, and he sees an old woman walking on the side of the road. How she got there or where she was going was not apparent because she was so far out in the middle of nowhere. He didn't see her right way, but as he passes, he noticed that she is dressed in traditional clothing, a shawl, dress, moccasins, and her hair in the traditional bun. Not too odd, many elders still choose to dress traditionally. But why was she out in such cold weather this late at night? Hitchhiking. Maybe he passed her too quickly and now has to turn around. And as he makes a U-turn, he notices she is nowhere to be seen. This is fairly flat terrain, and he for sure seen an old woman walking. He pulls the squad car over and steps out with his flashlight. Confused, he manages to find the woman's footprints in the shallow snow. He follows the footprints until they suddenly turn into what look like dog footprints leading away from the road in a hurry. He immediately jumps back into the squad car and meets up with another officer near his patrol. He's a little shaken up, but asks the other officer if he has ever seen anything like that. The officer tells him that he has. He also explains that sometimes it's an old woman, sometimes a very beautiful young girl, but always on that road and always in the snow, waiting for the right Good Samaritan to let her into their car. I still get nervous driving those wide, open spaces at night. I keep my eyes strictly on the road and turn my music up high. I rarely pick up hitchhikers, but I never pick them up at night. 8th story. Skinwalker in the woods. I live right next to a Navajo reservation and have made friends with many of the people there my age. We like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teens. I walk over a lot since my best friend lives a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek and usually only takes me about 25 to 30 minutes. I've made this trip dozens of times and have grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge. There is a patch of forest, however, about midway there. It's a little unnerving sometimes. There is always that feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I tried to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind playing tricks on me. This day I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey through. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound? The one that screams there is definitely someone or something there with you. I froze, not sure of what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know the best option in this situation. I whispered, "Hello," hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips. I don't know why I even opened my mouth, but it was out there, so I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back in the sound of my voice. "Hello." I started to breathe too fast. My heart pounded against my chest. I felt like I might faint. "Hello." My voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream. I couldn't reply, as my voice echoed over and over from a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. "Hello, hello, hello." It repeated. "Stop it." I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent. For a long minute, nothing happened. The air grew stale, and I realized for the first time that there were no typical forest sounds. There were no bugs, no frogs or crickets, nothing. I stood there, terrified, waiting to see what would happen next. "Stop it." It mimicked back. I'd had enough and was willing my heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard rustling in the bushes 20 feet to my left. I watched in horror as a deer head with huge antlers protruded through the brush. As it came further out and stood up on twos, I took off. I flew out of those woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mom when I got there. I just went up to my room, laid down, and thought about what happened. My mother came in at some point and asked me if everything was all right. I replied that yes. I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I might have been afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me that no matter what happened that night, to not reply or look out my window. This terrified me even more. He said to call him the next morning and he would explain more, and that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake listening to every little sound the night brought. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, the air changed. The night sounds quieted. I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers up over my head like a child, far too scared to move. It came after a long moment. "Hello," I cried. It was all I could do. "Hello. Stop it." It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said, but then it did something new. It called my name. "Amy." My mother's voice. "Amy. Amy, come here." "Hello?" "Stop it." My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke around 12 to my friend calling to tell me he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what happened to me. He said there was a creature they called Yi Nald Lashii, he who goes on all fours, or a skinwalker. He explained that it was an evil which that used dark magic to transform into an animal with the attributes it required, and that it had caught my scent and knew me now. I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, that I would always have to be careful. Last night, I heard scratching on my window, then a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, but also adding in things I hadn't said, in my mother's voice. At one point it started calling my name, but drawing it out really far like A-A-M-I-E-I-E. It tried to get me to come outside, or to open the door and let it in my house. This went on all night. At this point, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is it seriously going stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I could take that. Ninth story. The Skinwalker. I don't consider myself to be a particularly superstitious person. That is to say, I get the occasional kick out of the horoscope and my boyfriend, and I like to humor the idea that spirits and poltergeists exist. We even joke about how we'd haunt people when we died and came back as ghosts. In fact, my boyfriend refuses to go anywhere near a Ouija board. Refuses to even think of it. Why even tempt it? He'd say. Why would you want to taunt evil ghosts like that? Ghosts never play fair, and if you piss one off, you're screwed. I don't think he was ever serious. Just precautionary. But maybe he was right. God, this all happened so recently I'm still shaken. Can barely write about it now without my nerves acting up. Okay, here it goes. A few weeks ago, my mom, sister, and I went to Colorado for an entire week of vacation. We were going to drive all over the state, visit the national parks, and go horseback riding and whitewater rafting and so much more. I was excited, and I sorely needed a break from work anyway. We drove a grueling 16 hours out there and spent our first day rafting down the rivers. After an extremely wet but exhilarating day, we drove to a ranch house to go horseback riding. We arrived at sunset, so it was too late to do anything, but we had all next day to ride the trails and see the sights. The ranch was dumpy, to put it nicely. It was all run down with scraps of steel everywhere, and the shoddy lodging cabins were in desperate need for repair. I swear the roof over our shack of a cabin was a giant piece of drywall with shingles stapled to the top. My sister and I thoroughly checked the place for spiders and bugs before we even thought of bringing our luggage inside. It was only for the night, I reassured myself. Just one night in a dumpy shack on a rock-hard bed that probably had bed bugs under the sheets. I shuddered at the thought. My mom tried to cheer us up. She had brought skewers and a pack of hot dogs to roast over the communal fire pit. Happy to get out of the shack, my sister and I made a nice, cozy fire, and soon a few other visitors came out to sit around the fire and roast esmores and share stories. We talked about where we were from, where we were going, and all our adventures along the way. Pretty soon the stories turned into tall tales and urban legends, and the sort of stuff you'd usually tell around a bonfire. That's when I spoke up. I love stories, especially scary ones. And hey, we're out west, we're in Native American territory. Why not liven the place up with my favorite local myth, the legend of the Skinwalkers? Now, for the uninitiated, Skinwalkers are very evil, very dangerous beings. They were humans who gained the ability to take on the form of an animal by wearing its pelt, usually through very dark and taboo magic. I knew all this and told my story. Who doesn't love a good ghost story, after all? Everyone seemed to be enjoying it. I admit I took some creative liberties, really just retold an old werewolf story, but with a skinwalker as the monster instead. I improvised a lot of the story and added a few things that weren't in the mythos at all. I gave our beloved frightening Skinwalker wide, crazed eyes with pinpoints for pupils with a matching insane smile. I made the Skinwalker horribly misshapen, swollen joints and arms that were too long and legs that were too short and a head that never sat straight on its shoulders. I made it as terrifying as I could imagine. No one minded. They actually really liked it. A man from Kentucky admitted the visuals alone were enough to creep him out. Victory in my book, if you ask me. And once I was done, everyone decided it was getting really late. Our firewood was dwindling, and it was as good a time as any to turn in for the night. We packed up our skewers and esmores, doused the fire, and headed to our little shacks. I tossed and turned a lot try to fall asleep. I couldn't get comfortable on that damn bed. A rock was probably cozier than that mattress. So against my better judgment, I got out of bed and walked about the cabin. I reasoned that if I stayed up late enough, I would be so tired that I would fall asleep no matter what I was laying on. I think I briefly contemplated sleeping on the floor. I wasn't that desperate yet. It was pitch black outside. No lights from any nearby street lamps. No car headlights, hell, not even the cabin lights were on. And I don't remember seeing a single star. It was a bit creepy, but I shrugged off the shiver creeping up my back as simply the cold tile floor beneath my feet. I did, however, find it odd there weren't any lights on at all on the property. You'd think there'd be a floodlight on the horse stables or in the main office, but no, nothing. That was really weird. I stepped outside in my flimsy foam flip-flops to get a better look. I could barely make out the ranch, and for some stupid reason, I decided to go walking around. Eventually, my eyes adjusted where I could see well enough to navigate. I paced up and down the road where the cabin sat, and then circled around to the fenced-in field where the horses were out grazing. Except there weren't any horses. Probably in the stables for the night, I reasoned. I shivered again. It was getting cold. I turned around to head back to my own cabin. It was stupid of me to be out all alone at an obscene hour. I had realized. I needed to get to bed. But when I turned, there was something in the middle of the road. Its shape was swallowed up by the surrounding darkness. I could barely make it out. But whatever it was tall and thin. I shrugged it off as just a pole or something else and kept walking, but then it moved. I froze. My breath caught in my throat, and I could barely breathe. I just imagined that, I said. I just imagined it. I'm freaking myself out. Get your fucking head straight. It moved again. My paralyzed throat managed to squeak out a pathetically weak whimper as my legs began to lose strength. I shivered violently against a cold that was building up inside of me. My eyes began to focus on the impossibly dark figure standing against a barely visible sleet gray night. Now I could see it. It was a person, but like nothing I had ever seen before. Its arms were impossibly long. Its legs impossibly short. It had a torso far too long for its rail-thin body and a head much too big for its pencil-thin neck. Its right arm was sticking out to its side, swinging up and down. Its blockish head, rolled onto its left shoulder, jerkily twitched up and down, up and down. It didn't move other than that, just stood there, twitching, arms jerking up and down, head lolling around its shoulder. I still stood there like the dumb fuck I was. My cabin was a few hundred yards behind that thing, and I wasn't so stupid as to try to walk past it. My only option was to go around behind the cabins and the stables and hope it didn't see me. I forced myself to lift my foot off the ground to step backwards. My flip-flop made a loud, wet smacking sound as it cracked against my foot, and I immediately froze in horror. The thing stopped too. It stood there perfectly straight, perfectly still, listening. I stayed as still as I could. My breath was shallow and panicked, and I tried to force myself to slow my breathing before I started wheezing. My heart thundered in my chest, my whole body was shaking. But I didn't move. Neither did it. I began to slowly, so goddamn slowly, bend over and slip my feet out of those fucking flip-flops. My feet touched the dirt and the crumbly gravel, but at least now I could move silently. I spared a quick glance to the side to see where I was going. 2 cabins were immediately to my right. I could slip between them with ease, disappear out of sight. I only looked away for a second. When I turned back, that fucking thing was gone. It was fucking gone. It fucking knew I was there. It was coming for me, oh fuck. Yet I still couldn't fucking move. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move no matter how loud my head screamed, run, 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 UFUCK, run. I heard something behind me. I turned instinctively. Even though I knew fucking better, I still turned the fuck around. I was greeted with 2 bulging eyes. Oh fuck, it's eyes. Staring at me unblinking with 2 black pinholes for pupils and an insane smile that was stretched far too wide to be anything remotely human. My paralysis broke as I stared at that fucking thing. I ran. I fucking ran, crying my eyes out, trying to scream, but a horrible lead weight in my throat silenced me. My feet pounded on the dirt. I stomped over anything in my way. I trampled over a jagged rock, slicing my foot wide open. I ignored the pain. I ignored my body, screaming in agony. I ignored my own blood pouring from the wound. I didn't care. I just ran. I felt the cold creeping on my back. Oh God, that cold. It was sinking right into my bones. I couldn't stop shaking or sobbing, and I didn't stop running until I burst into the cabin. I slammed the door shut, bolted the lock, and leaped into my bed. I huddled under the blankets, hiding my head, and there I gasped and shook for breath. And I waited. I didn't sleep that entire night. I was too scared. I couldn't get rid of that chill. All I thought about was that thing, standing there and twitching. Morning finally broke, and I finally a loud breath of relief. Whatever I had seen had not come for me, and now that it was light, it could no longer take me by surprise. My mom noticed my bleeding foot and the blood I tracked through the cabin. I shrugged it off, said I cut myself the night before when we were making Eskimo. I don't think she believed me, but she didn't push it. We left not long after that. And as we left, I looked at the place where that thing once stood, and I shuddered again. But there was nothing. I assured myself there was nothing. We said goodbye to the ranchers and to our companions, and I noticed the man from Kentucky who said had thoroughly enjoyed my story. He told me again how much he liked it, said he was going to tell it to his own kids when he got home. They really liked scary stories, he said. And as we drove away, his head rolled onto his left shoulder, and he smiled a wide, insane smile as he waved us goodbye. 10th story, Skinwalker sighting, the haunting of the Navajo Reservation. I've always been a skeptic. Ghosts, aliens, monsters, they were all just stories to me. But after what I experienced in the Southwest, my perspective on the unknown has been forever altered. I was on a road trip with my best friend Jake. We had decided to take a detour through the Navajo Reservation in Arizona, mainly because of the scenic beauty and the rich history of the area. We had heard tales of skinwalkers, but we laughed them off. They were just myths, right? Our first day on the reservation was uneventful. We visited a few local spots, interacted with some of the locals, and set up camp near a canyon. As night fell, we sat around our campfire, sharing stories and enjoying the serenity of the desert. Around midnight, Jake decided to turn in. I stayed up, mesmerized by the stars. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, and I felt a profound sense of peace. That is, until I heard it. A low, guttural growl echoed through the canyon. I froze, thinking it might be a coyote or a mountain lion. But then I heard a voice. It was distorted, as if someone was speaking through a broken radio, but it was unmistakably Jake's voice. "Come here," it beckoned. Confused, I turned to our tent. Jake was sound asleep. The voice called out again, this time from the opposite direction. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it towards the source. What I saw will haunt me forever. Standing on a ridge was a figure. It looked like a man, but its limbs were elongated, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow. It wore tattered clothing, and its skin was a mottled gray. But the most disturbing part was its face. It was Jake's face. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The creature mimicked Jake's voice again. "Come here." It took a step towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain on my arm. Looking down, I saw a deep scratch, blood oozing out. The creature had marked me. I bolted to the tent, shaking Jake awake. "We need to go. Now!" I hissed. As we sped away in our car, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The creature stood in the middle of the road, watching us, its yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. We didn't stop driving until we reached the nearest town. We checked into a motel, and I spent the night researching skinwalkers. The legends said they were witches who could take the form of animals or people, using their voices to lure victims. The next few nights were restless. I'd wake up to that same distorted voice calling my name, and the scratch on my arm seemed to burn and throb. It was clear that the creature had not only marked me, but was now haunting my every move. Jake and I decided to consult a local Navajo elder. He told us that by interacting with the Skinwalker, I had inadvertently invited it into my life. The only way to rid myself of its torment was to confront it and perform a purification ritual. With heavy hearts, we returned to the reservation. The confrontation with the Skinwalker was terrifying, but with the elder's guidance, we managed to complete the ritual. The haunting ceased, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remain. The Southwest is beautiful, but it holds secrets that are beyond comprehension. And I'll never set foot on the Navajo reservation again. To all of you reading this, please be careful when you venture into unknown territories. Some legends are rooted in truth, and some nightmares are very, very real.